Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Ratchet the nice little music down in the background. We're going to have a little change of pace today, as I often do. I found the events of the day made me feel like gravitating towards, I guess, what's going to become one of a series of sub themes in my work, tying together some historical, traditional children's culture with events of the day. I'm going to entitle this one Little Red Riding Hood, A Child's History of Grooming. So let's delve into it. I don't know if I'm going to get whacked for this particular segment or not. I know this has been a very sensitive subject lately. And I will be giving you some of my commentary on that. So let's talk about where I'm coming from with this. In case you're not familiar with the old children's story of Little Red Riding Hood, the basic premise of the story is that Little Red Riding Hood, this little girl who in this picture looks decidedly less little and more provocatively nubile and attractive than one would normally have painted it in my day. So this is, one of the tie-ins that we're going to mention again, like we did in the story of the Little Red Hen, how much of children's literature, fairy tales, is actually being actively, culturally Marxized into narratives that are, in fact, rather closely allied with grooming. Okay, so let's back up and tell the original story of Little Red Riding Hood. This little girl is traditionally, I would say, about of an age where children used to be about ready to go, waltz around the neighborhood and visit maybe grandma or aunt, uncle, close friend, and bring them a little treat or something to thank them for something they did, back when communities were more functional than they are nowadays in most parts of the world. And was admonished to be careful, go there quickly, don't talk to strangers, blah, 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 blah. So this little girl was set out with some treats for grandma to take to her house, and happened to have to be through the woods to do so, which in the very old days, when population densities were not high, might have been something a child might need to do. Walk for a short distance through the woods to a neighbor's house, a family's house, etc., etc. At any rate, Little Red Riding Hood is probably about age 6-ish or so, and heads out through the woods with this little basket of goodies for her grandma, who is apparently sick in bed and needs some tending to by her family, and apparently the mother's too busy doing something or else in the home. Father's presumably busy working. We don't hear about a father. That the little girl gets sent out by herself with this basket of goodies and medicines or whatever to make grandma feel better. As she's waltzing through the woods, opportunistic wolf spots her, says, that looks like a pretty good lunch. And rather than just stepping right in and having lunch, like one would think a wolf would normally behave in this fairy tale land, the wolf comes up with the bright idea of, well, I'm going to get to grandma's place first, and I'm going to lay a trap for this little girl that she can't escape from. The wolf runs to grandma's house, eats grandma up. Apparently that was not really enough of a meal to make the wolf happy, and dresses up in grandma's nightgown and nightcap and gets into bed and pretends to be grandma. Little Red Riding Hood comes and sees this Interesting, Grandma in bed, and starts proclaiming, "My, Grandma, what big eyes you have! What big ears you have! What big snout you have!" And eventually gets to what big teeth you have, and Grandma says, "The better to eat you with," and then tries to eat up Little Red Riding Hood. But the little girl is a bit faster than the wolf in this situation, maybe because of the weight of Grandma's still whole corpse inside it, or because of all the get up it's got to have on to pretend to be Grandma. At any rate, Little Red Riding Hood escapes, manages to attract the attention of some nearby hunters who come and kill the wolf and happily don't shoot it in such a way that also kills Grandma, who is cut out of the wolf's inside and comes back out in one piece, and everybody lives happily ever after. Okay, now most of you who remember this story will have not thought about it much beyond the fact that it's just a traditional children's story. You've not thought about where it came from, why it developed, why it was told to children for so long, and was considered such a very good message to teach to young children. Or maybe if you did, you thought it was maybe just, well, be careful of strangers, if you go out by yourself, blah, 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 blah. But I think there are some very, very interesting shades to this story that are lost on most parents who aren't thinking very deeply or consciously about what they're giving their children. And if they're not, they're liable to be giving them a version of this story, like I've told you about before in the Little Red Hen segment, that may in fact be achieving a very different purpose from what was intended. A purpose that might include some subliminal grooming that you weren't aware of. Okay, so why would you cook up this weird story that, doesn't pass the sniff test of anything rational? Why would you tell that versus just a story of a child passing through the woods that almost gets eaten by a wolf and manages to run and get saved, to get to Grandma's house, and the wolf's trying to get in, and then the hunters come and save them? And, this is a real story. This is something that really could have happened. Why would you tell him this fanciful story? Well, I would posit that it's because this story was concocted precisely to be a very generic warning against grooming. This story originated, in fact, during the time when children were entrusted to priests and nuns for their education. And the parents really had no idea what was being taught to their children because they were illiterate. And there were some stories maybe creeping about that the priests and nuns may have not really had their children's best interest in mind. And if you know anything about the recent history of the Catholic Church, I'm going to tell you two pieces of it that you may not be aware of. Most of you are aware of the pedophilia scandal in the Catholic Church. That in fact, many priests, because of the vow of celibacy that was part of becoming a priest in that faith, had turned to homosexuality amongst each other, and a pattern of grooming it amongst the boys who entrusted to their care. And it was very, very common for the brighter boys of Christian communities in the Catholic areas to be sent for schooling to priests. The more talented boys who were able to sing or make music to be taught to be choir boys, to be taught to be musicians, composers. If you've ever watched the movie Amadeus, let's see, what's another good one? The Red Violin. That's a movie that you very much should watch. Part of that story of the Red Violin is about a young boy named Caspar who is being raised by monks who notice his talent and give him the best instrument they have to play with, which is this red violin. And he becomes so good, so adept at it, that they decide to pool their funds and pay a famous musician, a teacher and composer, to take this boy and raise him to his full potential. Now, that's a nice story, but it basically hides the underlying fact that you could just as easily find a child who had a proclivity for pederasty and groom them in the art of making themselves agreeable to higher levels of the priesthood. And this was not an uncommon way to get to the top if you started as a local parish priest. You would get into the entourage of a higher level prelate, maybe a cardinal. You would get accepted into service in the Vatican. And because of your beauty and usefulness as a attractive young boy or an attractive young lady, attractive young boys certainly had more potential in that system because the ladies could only be concubines unless they were raised in the nunly tradition, which had their own set of grooming targets. The abbeys tended to be kind of a counterculture, very much at odds with the priestly culture. And this became apparent. This is another piece of Catholic history which many may not be aware of, that while the scandal of pedophilia in the church was brewing, on the nun side of things, the Catholic nuns were actually at the forefront of the counterculture of support for women's rights, support for communism. Absolutely a core force in the developing counterculture of the 1960s. Many people don't remember that, but I absolutely do remember that. And there were cultural artifacts of that you can still find if you can find, like, there was a show called The Flying Nun, where there was this nun that was a non-standard nun who could fly and would go around and do really great things and show everybody how much better the world could be if this peace, love, oneness version of Christianity were practiced and spread. Okay, this is, in fact, evidence that the Catholic Church was used for grooming of another variety, political grooming. And this is why I think this outroar, this fury over the word grooming right now is particularly disturbing, because it's being associated with, grooming is an insult to the LGBTQ blah, 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 blah crowd, and we can't use it. And they are actively banning content which uses that term. When in fact, grooming has been far more often used for propaganda purposes, to basically take a parent's teachings and turn them upside down with what is being taught by the state. I urge you to look into the history of grooming through public education in communist countries. Communism is an ideology that absolutely is rooted in the deconstruction of every structure of current society, most particularly the family and traditional religion. Those are considered the mortal enemies of communism. Why? Because they create a set of values which communists believe prop up the old system that they want to completely demolish and replace with something new. And that is the essence of communist ideology. It is the essence of wokeist ideology. That is the real reason behind the woke movement, not because they want freedom for their new identities and their new sexes and their new kinds of sex change operated people. They want to deconstruct the entirety of Western culture and replace it with something that they can define through their PR mouthpieces in the celebrity Hollywood set. And this has been going on for 100 years. It originally was used to basically indoctrinate an ideology of nationalism, American nationalism and patriotism, and propping up what were, quote, the capitalist values of the United States. Go back and look at children's programming, media of the early days of TV, the early days of cinema. Very, very different messaging. To the extent that, even though there are Disney classics from that era, they are heavily censored and downplayed because their messaging, their ideology is so radically opposed to what they're trying to push now. This is exactly why so many classic movies are getting remade, remastered in new forms, new casting, new story twists. This is exactly why Shakespeare is getting remastered in all these weird versions where, the characters are all women, the women characters are women, and the men characters are women, or whatever. All these different reimaginings, these identity politicking versions of Shakespeare are exactly the same as what's going on in all of media. In music too. If you will notice, in fact, taking a look at, I have been fortunate to have been involved in raising 4 children. The oldest of 2 were raised in the 80s. The next younger, who's now 7, I raised as a stay-at-home parent for about 5 years, not long ago. And my newest, who's only about 7 months now, is going to get some interesting upbringing through a combination of my culture and my wife's culture here in Indonesia. So it'll be interesting to see what a combination of traditional Western values and Muslim values, Asian values is going to produce in this interesting young man that we are in the process of indoctrinating. Yes, parents do indoctrinate their children. They must indoctrinate their children. That is a parental responsibility. It is not something that anybody should take away from a parent unless they demonstrate that they cannot use that responsibility responsibly. Okay? Similarly, once the child is of school age, The school is responsible for responsible indoctrination into a set of values that serves their community. And to the extent they don't, they are, to my way of thinking, committing a karmic sin. As you understand how I view sin in my omnist way, tyranny is the cardinal karmic sin. In fact, tyranny is the only real sin. In the world of souls, that pretty much covers everything else. If you murder a soul before its mission is complete on the earth in this incarnation, that's a tyranny of sorts. You're cutting short their opportunity to continue to explore the various experience and choices that they would have gotten to explore in this lifetime, this incarnation. So even though death is not permanent, it's not the final thing like many people believe, that still is a sin. But it's just as big a sin to exert the tyranny of information, which is another recent talk I did, and I think will make more sense maybe in the context of this discussion today. The stories we tell children and how we tell them, how we present them, are very, very much part of this indoctrination. Look at the way that this picture draws the wolf, draws Red Riding Hood. Okay, the wolf is drawn as an almost demonic figure. Yes, much more scary than it needs to be in any reasonably well thought out children's book. I don't care how great the artist was that produced this, they had no intent of being responsible about what they were putting before children. Nor was painting Red Riding Hood as this nubile young lovely that, some pervert father reading the story could fantasize about. This is evil. This is totally against the principles of good indoctrination of children. And that's why I chose this picture out of so many of the images that were there. And there were many other images I could have given you other takes on as being too dumbed down of the whole idea of the story or too graphically depicting what was going on. But this story is ultimately a warning against grooming. And this did happen. This has happened all throughout time. And this is why that story was iconic, because everybody knew that there were other people out there that you didn't want your children to be around. And they might be disguised as your clergyman. They might be disguised as a uncle or aunt or grandparent, but they were actually wolves underneath with an agenda that was not good for your child. And if you look at the essence of most of the classic fairy tales like this, the ones that aren't just namby-pamby, the princess finds the prince and they live happily ever after bullshit, they're cautionary in nature. They teach kids that they have to behave to get what they want. They teach kids that they have to be careful to avoid the pitfalls of life. That's what responsible parenting, responsible children's content should do. And to the extent that you're doing anything with the children in your charge, either as a parent, as a teacher, as an author, as a musician, as a content creator on the internet, that is inconsistent with that abuses your position of influence on young minds to foist an agenda that their parents may not approve of, that might be harmful or dangerous depending on where they're growing up in and what their capabilities are and what their ambitions are versus what you want them to be, you are committing a karmic sin, a tyranny, great or small, against those children. Even if it's only the small tyranny of encouraging them to be narcissistic. And much of what's targeting children these days is doing exactly that. Telling children, oh, you can have whatever you want if you just believe. This whole nonsense of the law of attraction is extremely harmful to children. You cannot make believe what you want and make it happen just because your mind is controlling. It's bullshit, it's not true, and it's extremely dangerous to children. And these people that are foisting off this insane pseudo-scientific spirituality are committing grave karmic error, grave karmic sins against children, especially if you're teaching them that. I don't know how much more strong I can state this. What I'm going to have to do to get through to the thick skulls of humanity, that if you are doing things like this, you are not going to be one of the ones that gets past this event, this apocalypse, and remains in God's universe, in God's chosen species. You're not. I don't care what you believe, what God you worship, how often you go to church, how pure and noble and virtuous you think you are. If you are committing these little tyrannies on your children, and they are tyrannies, forcing a child into the mold that you want them to conform to is a tyranny. Now, you have to force them into behaving in a way that is appropriate for the culture that they are raised in, for the family that they are raised in, because we're all capable of tyranny. And children can be the biggest tyrants of all if they're enabled. And this is why these nut jobs that are promoting unconditional love parenting are some of the worst of the bunch. They let their children, they actually encourage their children to become tyrants. They don't set boundaries for them. They don't exert the tough love that a parent has to do when it's easy to do when the children are young and impressionable and are able to learn right from wrong without having actually experienced it. And that is a very, very important thing to teach children. Because until they get old enough, I mean, most people, in fact, don't even ever get to the point where they can tell right from wrong inherently. They never reach that level of consciousness. They never get past the beast level of, I want this, so I'm going to go get that. And anybody that gets in my way must be a bad guy. This is how most people think. This is how most people go through life. I don't care how smart they are, how successful they are. If you look at their behavior patterns, they're living at a beast level of consciousness. No comprehension of any spiritual responsibilities, any spiritual goals. They just want to get more marbles in my pocket or the pockets of my family and friends at the end of the game than anybody else, and protect those marbles from anybody who might take them, or grab marbles from anybody who seems like they have more than they deserve. These are beast-level souls, and they are not going to be continuing on in humanity after this event is concluded. This is what the mark of the beast is all about. Not all of them are like this wolf on the left here, or like this Jezebel on the right in this really warped drawing of the Little Red Riding Hood story. There are a lot of ways to be a beast, but they all involve tyranny of some sort. At any rate, I'm going to keep this a very short one for now. I hope you found that analogy, that example of the Little Red Riding Hood story and how it relates to grooming useful, and you will support me in absolutely rejecting this idea that the whole idea of grooming is somehow anti-LGBTQ and can't be mentioned anymore, because grooming has a lot of dimensions to it. And if we can't talk about grooming, we can't talk about ideological grooming, political grooming, which is absolutely happening in schools and is very dangerous. Communist grooming in schools is very dangerous. It teaches kids that, oh, well, it's okay to take things away from people that have more than you because you deserve it. That's not true. That is the most horrible perversion of truth there could be. Why? Because not everybody deserves the same things. Not everybody has earned the same things. Anybody that knows anything about the game of souls and the game of consciousness knows that lower level consciousnesses don't deserve as much as others and will grab as much as they can get and take from others. They need to be regulated. They need to be controlled, and they need not to be put in positions of power. And anyone that thinks that they deserve more than anybody else because life is unfair, the system is unfair, is a dangerous person. They would be willing to destroy the baby and the bathwater so they could draw a new bath and put their babies in it and throw all the other babies in the trash bin. Literally. Abort them. Vaccine them out of existence. Starve them. It's exactly what's going on with this Great Reset idea of the World Economic Forum, and exactly what is going on in the Chinese country under the Chinese Communist Party, who has been the testing arm of the World Economic Forum on their ideas of communist globalist perfection. This is the evil cabal that people are talking about. It's not a monolithic thing. It's sort of an alliance between some very, very misguided souls, misguided, very low consciousness souls who think they know a lot, but actually don't know squat, even though they may have degrees from Harvard and Yale and all the best schools because I can afford to send my kids there. These people are idiots. They think you can shoehorn goodness and rightness into people. That somehow, because they have more money, they have more influence, they have more power, that their opinions, their ideas are better than anybody else's. Nothing could be further from the truth. Anybody who's ambitious enough to get to the top in today's system of likes, shares, subscribes, and sponsorship is a sellout. Would sell their own mother out for a few more likes, for a sensationalism featured event that pulls more attention to them. I mean, this is, if you follow Tim Pool like I do, this is a perfect way to characterize both sides of this idiot woke lady trying to get sympathy because, all of this horrible stuff going on the right made me incontinent at work and I shit my pants. And the same is going on the other end, trying to sensationalize the joke, laughing at this person. And they're both very low consciousness souls who are just looking for attention. Just looking to get more of what they think is owed to them because they're so special. These are not the sharpest souls in this shed, folks. It doesn't matter how successful they are. It doesn't matter how many likes, shares, subscribes, how many viewers they get, how many people come to their stand-up comedy shows. That's not the measure of success in the long run. They may seem very successful in one lifetime, but that's one lifetime of many. And when they get to heaven and they have their life review and see all the people they stepped on to get there, all the little tyrannies, big and little tyrannies they committed on the way, and realize the karma that they've got loading down their soul that's going to have to be cleaned, they're going to see that they really lost this round, thinking they were winning. You don't want to be one of those people. I know it seems like that's the way to get ahead in the world. It's not. Now, of course, you got to struggle to make ends meet. You've got to feed your family. You've got to somehow stay alive in all this for as long as you can. Because nobody wants to die unless you're one of those ones who's gotten to the point where, you know what, I think I've achieved everything I was supposed to do in this lifetime. And frankly, this incarnation isn't very much fun. And I could relate with you there. I've been at that point a number of times in my journey, and I'm glad I didn't end it when I was tempted to, because I would never have gotten to the level of consciousness I've achieved. And that level is not, I'm not bragging about it. It's been very difficult. I've had to go through dark nights of the soul that would make you wonder how you could possibly stay sane, how you could possibly stay alive through it all. And I can tell you about that sometime, but again, I'm not into bragging about my experience. I'm into sharing what I know of the soul's experience, so hopefully people can find a better path to their own higher consciousness, their higher self, that doesn't involve falling into so many pools of bullshit. And that's all that you're going to get from these jerks that are trying to profiteer their way into being an influencer. Whether it's through science, through spirituality, through politics, through economics, whatever. They're all selling snake oil that they think is going to be popular. Well, you know what? If something is popular, gets a lot of following, it's because it's a bunch of bullshit that people like. Oh, this sounds good. It makes me feel good. Well, maybe that gets you through a day or two, but nothing like that is going to make you feel good permanently, because any get rich quick scheme, get enlightened quick scheme that somebody is going to be shooting at you, you're going to try, and it's not going to work. Well, most of the time, maybe it will work. And if it works, you're going to think, ooh, I am enlightened too. I'm going to go make my own brand of snake oil and sell it. And you'll get on the bandwagon of starting up your own snake oil sales stand. And maybe that's what you think I'm doing. Well, if that's what I'm doing, I'm certainly not making a profit from it. I'm not getting a huge following. Most people who are telling the truth don't. I'm telling you the truth because I know it's the truth. I've been through it. If you want to listen to it, fine. If you don't, if you'd rather listen to the snake oil lies of somebody else, fine. The truth is what'll come back and bite you in the end. May not be in this lifetime, it certainly will be in the afterlife. Because that's what the life review is all about. That's what the afterlife experience is all about, is seeing the truth, at least insofar as you're ready to see it. And if you haven't achieved the highest level of consciousness, you haven't become a god already, you're not going to really get the full story even then. That's why there are people incarnating again and again and again, and, the atheist path. following the materialist path, following the Sunday Christian path, following the five-time ritual prayer Muslim path that allows you to be a total ass, total jerk to everybody else when you're not praying. An abusive asshole, which certainly is a very real characteristic of Muslim practice in some countries. I'm sorry. You're not going to get to the good place doing that. I'm telling you that, and you're going to find it out for yourself. At any rate, I think I'm going to end this one here. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Like, share, subscribe if you want. Throw darts at me. It doesn't really matter to me. Till the next time, this is Rob Trump with the Omnist Hour. Thanks.